Hello. Yeah, so going to be talking about cross-runtime compatibility. I don't have slides. I don't like slides. I never follow slides. I'll write them 3 or 4 times, and then I'll completely forget what I write. So we're just going to write code. All right, so I think I know pretty much all of you, but James Snell. I'm on the Node, been involved with Node for 10 years now. I'm also over at Cloudflare. I work on the workers runtime itself. I am one of the co-founders of the Winter CG group that is focusing on compatibility across runtimes, talking about like Node and Dino and Bun and workers and everything that's not a browser, basically, making sure they're working together. So, I really wanted to kind of come and just talk informally a little bit about what are the kinds of things that we need to think about when we are talking about compatibility, right? When Workers was first released, it came up and said, hey, we want to be web compatible. Unfortunately, most of the APIs that they implemented were not actually web compatible. They were close, they looked like it, but they weren't actually there. Like our fetch implementation, our streams implementation, none of it was actually compatible with the specs. When Dino was first released, this focuses on web compatibility, right? And they did a great job there, and they were like, we're going to be different from Node, except all the users said, can you be like Node? And so they've spent the past 4 years trying to, work on being like Node. I've been with Cloudflare for 3 years, and during that time, it was like, make this work like Node. Bun comes along. We're going to be like Node, only faster, but they still need to be like Node. So, let's talk a little bit about what actually that means. And, I like, this is a simplified, much simplified version of an old puzzle I used to use when I was doing some consulting work. If you can take a look at this bit of code, hopefully you folks can read it. What does this actually print to the console? Without running the code, do you know what the queue microtask, process next tick, set timeout, do you actually know what the execution order of these are? Do you know how this is actually going to run? So let's try it out. Let's look at Node. Let's say puzzle.js. Hey, it prints hello, right? Okay, in this particular case. This is a common JS module. What if I change it just slightly and use import instead of require? Is it going to print the same thing? Yes. Yeah, you'd think so. I just changed one line of code and I'm still just in Node, right? All right, let's take a look at this. Let's try Dino. Sorry. Okay. Dino comps. All right, let's try just Dino run puzzle.js. Is that going to work? Hey, it worked. Oh, shoot, we got a different result. Right? Let's try Bun. Let's see what happens with Bun. Let's do a Bun run puzzle. Oh, we got another result. So we got 3 different runtimes with 4 different results. All right. Let's add one more runtime to it. I'm running workers here locally, and that's a browser request. So I'm going to kind of pull this up. We're going to have some. The top, I'm going to type the command. The bottom, we'll actually see the output. Let's see what happens here if I do the same code, process SCD write out. I'll just do curl localhost 8787, and I only got EHL. Like, okay. What happened there? Well, workers handles I/O slightly differently. If the request completes before a timer completes, that timer actually gets canceled. So we actually would need to add another await in here to actually make that work where we get all of the content, but it's still in the wrong order. All right? Because in workers, set immediate, we can't actually make it work the same way that Node does. We have a different event loop, and it's got different characteristics. So our set immediate is actually implemented in terms of set timeout with a 0 duration. And that's as close as we can get currently to actually matching that behavior. So 4 runtimes, 5 different results, right? And I can actually, make this even worse, get even more, even stranger results if I wanted to play with it a little bit more. So what's going on here? We all have all these runtimes, Bun, Dino, Workers, Node, they all implement these APIs. They implement QMicroTest, they implement Nexttick, and on some measures of interop, great. Requires work, you can require the same modules, the APIs exist, but they work differently. And a lot of applications out there, like in theory, you shouldn't have to depend, you really, like the general rule, if your application depends on the specific ordering of async events, you wrote the damn thing wrong, right? You shouldn't depend on it. In practice, everybody does, right? There was countless jobs, going out doing consulting work, looking at code in production. So much code out there depends on the specific ordering of async events, right? This is why Zalgo ends up being such a problem. Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? Exactly when are you scheduling these things? Most of the performance issues that people have with code in Node ends up being because they got the timing wrong of these different events, right? And so here, yeah, in some measure, these runtimes are compatible with each other. They run this code, right? But the results are completely different, right? How do we fix this problem? When we have, Dino has its own event loop, right? I think it's using Tokyo. Workers has its own event loop. It's called a KJ. It's a KJ library. It's basically just an e-poll. Node has libuv. Bun has its own thing. All of these have different characteristics. How do we make sure that the timing is actually consistent? That's a very difficult problem to solve. All right, let's look at a slightly different issue. This one's a little more simple. Let's see. Let's see if I can pull this code up. All right. We're going to create two bad URLs. These are going to throw errors, right? Intentionally throw errors. If you create a new URL without an argument, or if you create it with a bad URL, it should say, nope, we're not going to do it. Now, Node, a number of years ago, we added the code property, right? And the reason we added the code property is to make understanding which error was actually thrown easier to understand programmatically, right? A lot of cases, it used to be with Node, we would add a period to an error message and half the planet would break, right? Because people are actually checking the error message to see what was actually happening. The old, I think it was an old version of the glob module, I think, did this like a long time ago. It actually would check the error, like if you went, in order to prevent going into an infinite loop, it would check to see if it threw a particular error at a particular point. And that point was different on different operating systems. So in some cases it would iterate, a certain number of times, and like on Mac it would be a different number. But it would actually check the error message, and I broke NPM once by changing that. And it was just because the error, this production code was checking the error message. So we added the code property. Cool. All right. So that's the setup for that. Let's take a look at what Node does here. Let's run this index. Cool. All right. URL argument must be specified, but we, more importantly, we get this ERR missing args argument, right, for this first one, because we're not passing any arguments. And then on the second one, we get the error invalid URL. Cool. All right, let's see what Dino does. Dino run. All right, so we get a completely different error message, and more importantly, we don't get error codes, right? Same code, still runs, still got the right result, they erred. Right? But is this code compatible with Node? Is the result compatible with Node? If you've written your code to depend on checking the error code, suddenly that's undefined, you don't get it. If you've written that code to check the error message, don't work, right? Hey, the APIs exist. It all works, right? Nope. Let's see what what Bun does. Bun, run. All right, completely different error messages entirely, but now we actually do have the code. So in some cases, it works. Other cases, it doesn't. In workers, we haven't yet implemented the codes. So we have 4 runtimes, 2 of which have the code, 2 of which do not have the codes. And in some of these, even like in Bun, they haven't implemented all the codes, right? So these are the kind of things, just having that API available, just having where import works. Like so many modules in workers, for instance, we get a lot of requests, hey, make this module work, right? And their definition of make it work is they tried running it, and when it hit the require statement, it said, can't load this because it doesn't exist, right? Or when it does load, they say this, this function is, does not exist. So make that work. Make that function exist. Make that module exist. That's not enough. We can't do that, right? There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more detail. Production code is messy. It doesn't just depend on the existence of these things, right? All right, so let's see. We have a couple other examples. Let me go back to my master list here. All right, node tests. All right, so I have Node on here, of course. Let me switch over to that. Make sure I'm in the right directory. There we go. All right, so node tests are fairly extensive. There are like thousands of them here, and we're not going to go through all of them. But what do you think the chances are that a single node test file will run in all these runtimes? No, it's almost 0%. I mean, it's getting better. It's getting better. But if you think about it, like all these runtimes are saying we want to be compatible with Node. What does Node compatible mean? There's no formal definition, right? It's just, does it work like Node, right? Well, what's our test for what does it work like Node? Well, can it run the Node tests? So let's see. That's it. So let's take test util. Let me go to the screen here, make it a little bit easier. Test util. If I can type, that'd be fantastic. Module not found, that's not the right one. No, I don't want to display all. That's a little better, but let me see here. Is it Node.util? No, we'll do Node.zlib. That one I know exists. And there's no output because the test just succeeds, right? It works. Great. Fantastic. Let's run that in Dino and see what happens. Node or Dino, run, test, zlib. Oh, module not found. Okay. Oh, that's bad. Well, it turns out you got to add a JS to Dino. Oh, that didn't work either. Huh. Okay, so it says now we have to actually has to be a common JS because this is a common JS file. So let's do that. Let's just copy test zlib, yes, as is. We'll make that CJS, and let's go Dino run test zlib CJS. Oh, okay, permissions. We gotta. All right, let's this. Oh, that didn't work either. Why? Let's type up uncaught type error. Net get default auto select family attempt timeout does not exist. Okay, I was running zlib. I don't know what the heck that has to do with net. Well, it happens. It turns out that function is used as part of our test harness in Node, and it's just one of the buried things in there. And this function just happens to not be implemented by Dino. Yeah. So it's like, okay, great, that's fun. In order to get this test to work, now I have to deconstruct the test, figure out which parts of the test harness it actually depends on, and be able to extract those pieces out. In workers, we're having a really hard time with this because we can't just run a top-level file like this in workers. We have to have it structured a particular way. We have a number of constraints, like top-level scope, we can't run any I/O, right? We can't do set timeout at the top level. We can't load a file at the top level. It has to be done in a particular place in that execution. So our tests, I don't know if you've ever looked at them. They're horrible. Like they work. They're effective. We have thousands of them. They're great, but they mix external tests like public API tests, internal tests, internal APIs that we don't actually expose. We have a bespoke test harness. We don't use a standard test harness. There's very little actual documentation in the test, so we don't really know what's actually being tested. So for a platform like Workers, when we port a particular API, we have to go through a ton of work, and poor Yagi's just had to go through this with zlib here recently, go through each individual test and port individual sections out into a separate format that we can run. That doesn't have reliance on this test harness, that doesn't have reliance on these internal APIs or internal flags and these kinds of things. Maintaining that is going to be terrible, right? Because if breaking changes come down the road, if little things, we have to sit there and maintain that. Ideally, we would just take nodes tests, run that. None of the platforms can actually do that. Let's take a look at Bun. Who thinks Bun Run is going to handle this? Let's say, nope, okay, script, am I in the wrong directory? Nope. I think I got a test, zlib, I think it does have to be JS. Oh, that didn't work either. Interestingly, it did actually work. The test actually ran. The problem is Node's test harness checks for unexpected globals as it's cleaning up, right? It checks to make sure, like there's a memory leak checks, there's additional things that check. Well, Bun happens to insert additional globals that Node doesn't expect. So when it tries to run Node's test harness to check this, it finds things like HTML rewriter, which doesn't exist in Node, right? And it's a global, hey, it's there, but the test blows up. Again, another platform, we have another set of things we have to go through and figure out and kind of tease out and get and figure out if it's going to work or not. Let's see another one. This one's a fun one. All right, everyone familiar with the fact that buffer uses a shared memory slab underneath, right? Typically in Node. So if you come up and you say, let's say, b buffer from hello, right? That buffer itself is only going to have 5 bytes, but if you look at the underlying buffer, it's actually 8,192 bytes underneath, and that's a shared memory slab. So anytime you allocate this, it kind of comes off that, right? You'd think that this was an unimportant detail. Turns out, in reality, again, code is messy. There's actually code out in the wild that depends on this, right? Scary. I've yelled at people not to depend on this, but Dino. If we exit out of here, let's look at Dino. If I can remember the right syntax, because I have to import it. Import node buffer. And if we say buffer from, and just the fact that I have to remember a different syntax for a different runtime, it's great. But if I take a look at that, okay, I'm still 5. If I look at the underlying buffer, not sure. If I run, yeah, that's right. It's another different way of exiting that than Node. Okay. If I run the bun REPL, if it'll actually load, since I'm not actually on the Wi-Fi here, I don't think it'll actually load. Bun REPL actually will download, and install dynamically, and I don't think it'll actually load. Bun doesn't do it either. Bun doesn't use the shared memory space either, and Workers doesn't either. I've encountered within the past about 3 months, I've encountered two projects that depended on the shared memory buffer that just don't work in Workers, because of this, and they're having to refactor it in order to depend on that. So I mean, this was just I'm going through this rather quick, and I'm not going to use the whole time. I can open up for questions and stuff, because I really just wanted to just kind of peel back a little bit and talk about it, because we've had so many cases. We have a matrix that Workers has been working on for a while, and Igor's here, his team is one of the responsible for this, really doing a lot of work in making Workers more Node compatible. But the matrix goes through and lists. Like earlier, at the beginning of the year, it was like the entire column saying, does Workers have this API? It was red. We didn't have these things. We only had a few. With all the great work that the team has done, now a lot of those boxes are green. All right? You look at it, looks fantastic. That only marks that the API exists. Some of those APIs, you try to run them, it actually throws an error saying this is not actually implemented. But hey, you can import it. All right? You're doing great, but there's more work to be done. Dino has been working on compatibility for 4 years now, Node compatibility. Bun, I think Bun's already in its 3rd year. It's still working on it. It came out the gate saying it wanted to be compatible, but it still has gaps. I've been with Cloudflare for 3 years. We've been working on this problem, a lot slower than the other two, but we've been working on it. Workers is a very different environment, so Node compatibility means something different there. But we've been working on it for like 3 years. There's a lot of work, but we have people every day, just make it work. Just get it. It should just be there. It doesn't exist. That's not a thing that we can actually do. One of the things that I want to do, and I'm going to be talking about this at the Collaborator Summit coming up, is our tests in Node. I want them to be the definition of conformance for the industry. Like, if you're going to be conformant to Node, pass these tests. In order to do that, we have to be able to run them, right? We have to separate what is testing internal API that is always going to be specific to Node, right? The internal flags, right? Everything that's in the lib internal directory, everything in there, right? All of that is going to be different in every other runtime, right? So in order to pass the test, we have to extract those from the test. We have to separate the public API service from the internal, right? We also have to get rid of this, or not get rid of it, but at least evolve the test harness, right? So that we don't have the test harness itself relying on Node internals, on Node-specific things that don't rely to everything else. But the problem is huge. Like I said, just in this one directory, let's do a line count, if I can remember the syntax, LC. What is the count? Anyway, there's thousands of files in here. If we look at it, just in this one directory, in one of the test directories, and there's multiple, there's like almost 4,000 files in here. And every single one of them, some of them test one thing. There's one file in here that tests like the entire API service of a module, and it's like several thousand lines. There's very little structure to these tests, and we have to port every single one individually. So part of the talk here right now is a cry for help. Okay? We need more people involved, if only to make it so that Yagis doesn't get to spend half of his day just porting tests and, you know, me asking him if it's done or not. All right? There's a lot to do here, but one of the risks, and I'll just close on this point, we can open it up for questions and go on. Like I said, I'm not going to use the full time, but one of the risks as Dino and Node, or Dino and Bun, and these other runtimes start to adopt these Node APIs and say, hey, we're going to be compatible. What if they're not, right? What if they start introducing small inconsistencies and small bugs? What does that do to the ecosystem? Right? It starts to fragment it significantly, right? We've had cases with workers where, you know, folks are like, okay, well, Bun works this way when it implements the Node API. Do the same. It's like, well, no, if it doesn't work like that way in Node, then no, we don't want to do that, right? And it starts to add friction and add problems, and we don't want a case where we end up the same way that the browsers were 10, 15 years ago, right? Where, hey, it only works in, you know, Microsoft Internet Explorer, right? You know, and we have to write all this special case code and everything else. The other thing, the other thing that I want to say a word on feature detection. A lot of folks will say, you know, hey, am I running in Node? And they make that decision by trying to import like one of the core modules. Great, we have that too. You're not running in Node, right? You know, you're not running in, in Bun. So we add other things like Navigator, user agent to just say, are you actually in this environment? Some folks will try to run a function if it fails and they'll say, oh, we're in Node or we're in Dino. This stuff sucks. Please stop doing that. And that's to everybody, like the entire industry. There's so many different ways people are doing feature detection, and it's just causing us problems when we actually try to roll out these new features, right? So things like Navigator user agent, it exists in Node, it exists in Bun, it's in Dino, it's in workers. Those are the things, like these tokens that are always going to be the same, that aren't going to be introduced. Like if we add a new API, it's not going to break the planet, right? Those are the things you need to be relying on. Okay, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so relatable. They have questions?
Yes, and I have so many.
Yeah? I also have questions. Do we have a microphone for questions? Yeah.
Check, check. Yes.
Okay, okay.
So I guess Workerd, but other platforms, because some of the APIs in Node are pure JavaScript. So do you re-implement them, or do you just take the code from Node, and then it's compatible by definition?
Yes and no. Some things we've completely re-implemented, like our implementation of buffer. Some of it came from Node.
That depends a bit on native code, though, so
Yep.
it's not pure JavaScript.
Yep. What are some of the modules that
Streams.
huh? Path. Oh yeah, Node Path. We've, so in Workerd, almost everything is implemented natively, right? We have some bits, kind of glue code, kind of like surface stuff that's JavaScript, but most of it is native, so it really depends.
So would an alternative or a complementing solution to the problem you're trying to solve is to, extract these JavaScript-only parts of Node into Node/path, Node/streams,
Yes.
that these runtimes could choose to use if they wanted to.
Yep, and we're actually doing that. So with Node Crypto is an absolutely massive API. And I started down the path of implementing this in Workerd as a separate implementation, got about a month into it, and I'm thinking this is way too painful, I don't want to do this. So what I'm actually doing in Node right now, and it's kind of a slow process, but I'm extracting all of the native bits of Node Crypto into a separate library, a dependency library. It's called just ncrypto right now, and it's still in the Node project. But when that's done, that's going to be pulled out into a separate repo that it will be a dependency that Node uses. There's still going to be some glue code in Node itself, but most of that functionality is going to be in a separate dependency that we'll be able to pull into Workerd and say, hey, key generation works identical because we're using the same code. Bun is also interested in using that same thing. I want to do that with the entire API surface in Node at some point. Getting there is going to take a long time, but yeah.
Next question. So is Node's behavior going to be the definition of correctness for WinterCG, etc.? I'm talking especially about this with the queue microtask. We had a talk at last collab session where it doesn't make sense in Node, but is that something we just have to live with for all platforms, or would they then, things that don't make sense even in Node, would you do that differently for the...
Yes and no. So WinterCG is a different thing. WinterCG is primarily focused on web compatibility. So making sure that things like fetch and readable stream are working consistently across all of the things. And by the way, what WinterCG is going to be evolving. We're currently in the process, right now it's a W3C community group, so which means it can't actually produce its own standards, right? We're in the process right now, in discussions, it's not finalized, of working with ECMA to set up an actual technical committee for moving all the WinterCG work into there. So it's going to partner with TC39 to actually start being able to produce specs. So with that, there will be a specification for WinterCG compliance, right? And along with something like the web platform tests to verify it. But that's web platform compatibility. For Node compatibility, the Node tests should be the compliance suite. That should be the definition of truth.
Do we need a summer CG for Node platform compatibility?
Yeah. Absolutely. All right.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I've got one.
Do we have time?
Quick one about
throw some at
change.
me if we run out of time.
Change management, basically. Say you do all that. We take the internals tests and put them somewhere where we can say, oh, that's special. You still have the problems that we have today where people are testing these internal properties and relying on them. And do you have ideas about how we get over that hump then once we get the code discipline?
Not a clue. That's what we need. Need some more input, more discussion, more just help around how do we structure these things. One, so it doesn't change the nature of the test, right? A lot of the tests as they are now are written very specifically to test very specific behaviors. Right? If we start adding structure, we're changing the nature of the test. So it's there's a lot we have to consider, and we need a plan. So, yeah. And I think one more over here, and then I think we're done.
Just on top of all those problems, what do you think about the fact that Dino has its own standard library now, is adding its own APIs, Bun is adding new non-standard APIs all the time, so this problem is kind of exploding and growing all the time as well. How do we deal with that?
So I'll take Dino Standard Lib first. It is fantastic, right? And they've done a fantastic bit of work to make sure that that works just not in Dino. It's not specific to Dino. It works in Node. It works in workers. It works in Bun. It is an absolutely fabulous piece of work that they've done, and it's a fantastic contribution to the ecosystem that they've put that work into it. So, I absolutely have to applaud the Standard Lib. And one of the nice things about that is the Standard Lib is not part of the runtime, right? So it's, you have that option of using it or not. Bun, I love what Bun is doing. I do not like the fact that they've been taking a kind of embrace and extend approach to a lot of APIs. Like, for instance, HTML rewriter originated in Workers. It was a Cloudflare Workers API. But we put it out there. Great. Here we go. Bun said, we're going to implement that. Fantastic. And immediately started adding features that don't exist in Workers. And then immediately after, Workers started getting feature requests, hey, make this work like Bun. No. They unilaterally made the choice to go and extend that. We don't have that same need. We're not going to do that. That becomes a Bun problem, right? And I think it's critical that the ecosystem put pressure on the runtimes not to do that. Like, if you want to have an extended API, put that under your own namespace, right? You can make it work the same way, similar, right? But don't call it the thing that everyone else uses, right? It has to be a different name. So.